Well, in the merry month of May, now from me home I started, left the girls and two, and nearly broken-hearted, saluted father dear, kissed me darling mother, drank a pint of beer, me grief and tears to smothered enough to reap the corn and leaf, for I was born, got a stout black sword, a banished ghost, and goblets, a brand new pair of brogues to rock the love of the bogs and frighten all the dogs on the rocky road. It's a double of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to Harriton and down the rocky road, and all the way to double of my...
It was really the friends with whom I went out drinking in Dublin when I came home on holidays from Paris who, unwittingly, provoked me into making Rocky Road. I was a junior feature writer for the Guardian newspaper in Paris, and I had this nice perk of being sent home to cover the annual Dublin Theatre Festival, a free trip home. It was great. But the lads began to irritate me, trying to convince me that the country had been transformed in my absence. Censorship was a thing of the past, they told me. Jesus, nobody pays any attention to the clergy anymore. There was even a priest with us saying the same thing.
The camera, the plight of an island community which survived more than 700 years of English occupation and then nearly sank under the weight of its own heroes.
I asked the Guardian if we could stay on a couple of months and look more deeply into this, and I did a huge investigation, talking to Jesuits, people in all kinds of walks of life, and the result of this was a series of articles called Climate of Repression, Student in Blinkers, and Grey Eminence, which was a reference to very powerful Archbishop of Dublin, John Charles McQuaid. When these articles appeared in The Guardian, there was a terrific outcry that lasted for well over a year. I decided then, I had this wild idea that I'd make a film about this, because I was now living or bathing, as it were, in a very lively film culture in France. And I had a wild idea that, because for an Irishman, that although we were great film fans, we didn't make, we had no film culture. But I had watched a bunch of young Turks in France, the new wave directors, dismantle all the barriers to independent filmmaking. I saw how they had used the camera as we at home use the pen, the camera stilo. An American friend of mine in Paris, Victor Herbert, had become a millionaire selling mutual funds, and I put the proposition that if he would finance my adventure, I could get the new wave cameraman, Raoul Coutard. He was already by then world famous. He had made about 10 films with Godard, he had made Jules and Jim and Lolo with Jacques Demy, and he was just an outstanding cameraman with world fame. I didn't know Coutard, so I was chancing my arm a bit, but a friend of mine knew his girlfriend, and I knew that he was making a film down in Tours. And so I went down to Tours, and I asked him if he'd make a film with me, and he said yes.
The director Godard and Coutard have made about a dozen films together. Their films are shot in an unconventional style, due in great part to Coutard's inventive and flexible camera work. Coutard used to be a stills cameraman, and what he's done is to make the job of a film cameraman almost as simple. Instead of a large crew and tons of equipment, he works virtually on his own with a handheld camera and minimal lights. He's in great demand. An Irish journalist called Peter Lennon, making his first film ever, asked him out of the blue to shoot it. He agreed. And a week or two ago, they started their documentary in Dublin. Can you tell me how you got hold of him in the first place?
Oh, well, how did I get hold? Well, it's just, I wanted to make a film about Ireland, and I wanted to do a very personal report on it, you know. And I knew that the person who, the only person who would do that kind of informal work well would be Coutard. So, well, quite simply, I used my position as a journalist. He was making a film down in Tours, and I went down to interview him, and I asked him if he'd be interested in doing it. And he said yes, and we'd talk about it when I come back to Paris. And he came back to Paris, which we did. And then, also, again, in those things, it seems that either, I mean, he seems to be quite clear about what he's doing all the time. Either he'll do it and there's no haggling about it, or he won't, presumably. Which has been, just, you know, on a few occasions he would tell you that that can't be done, or that it's better to do it another way. But there's never more than that involved in our relationship. He is quite laconic, as a matter of fact. This was going to be a two-week venture, you know, and he told me that he'd be free in 5 weeks' time, and then he wouldn't be free for 7 more months. And I knew perfectly well that if we waited for 7 months, that all the backing for my film would certainly evaporate. You know. I had to turn myself into a film director of a very complex film inside 5 weeks, and so I just said, yes, we'll do it. I remember I had a feeling, the most incredible feeling of sheer terror that I ever had in my life. You know, involving these professionals in a feature-length film, a guy who'd never shot a foot of film in his life.
On the first visit, we shot for 5 days, and straight away, the intention of this film was made very clear.
The kind of society that actually grew up was a society of what I call urbanized peasants. They were a society which was without moral courage, with constantly observing a self-interested silence, never speaking in moments of crisis, and in constant alliance with a completely obscurantist, repressive, regressive, and uncultivated church.
I was a product of that environment, a Christian Brothers boy, the effects diluted but not totally erased by life abroad. One of the first places we filmed was in the very classroom in which I was vigorously groomed to confront the evils of the world, and the emphasis always seemed to be on evil.
Because of Adam's sin, we are born without sanctifying grace. Our intellect is darkened, our will is weak, and our passions inclined to evil, and we are subject to suffering and death.
The effects of rooting and sin are as follows.
Well, you know, years ago I made a film here in 1967, and I asked kids questions out of the catechism, and one question was, what are the effects of original sin? Now, if I asked you that, I mean, what would you say were the effects of original sin?
I don't know.
Good up for you. And what are the offences against chastity? Did you know that either?
No.
Good.
Work sometime, isn't it? Huh? Long time no see. You must be expecting a bit of business.
At the time, we were given this priest, Father Cleary, and he was regarded as a swinging modern priest who would impress the nation, impress us, how relaxed and modern the Catholic Church had become. But you see, the difficulty is that most people accepted this as normal, that the priest was the person that they deferred to on all kinds of aspects of their lives, and particularly grotesquely in sexual matters, that mature married couples would actually rely on some idiot, ignorant young man for advice on something they presumably know little about. In fact, we didn't realize that Father Cleary knew a little more about it than we had realized at the time, because at this time he already had a mistress, which wasn't known for a couple of decades afterwards.
You'll all stand back for the prayers, and you know, you still...
Well, we're not against sex. I mean, it'd be ridiculous, you know. We just, in fact, our teaching, we elevate sex.
This is the first time I've seen this colour print in about, I don't know, it must be 25 years or something. And the problem was it was an experimental colour reversal that Kodak took off the market shortly afterwards, and it was very unstable. So it was terribly difficult to get a good, smooth narrative drive. And when the colour seemed to be sort of, to my oversensitive mind, jumping all over the place, I decided it should be printed in black and white or black and grey, which also suited the tone and atmosphere of the whole story of Ireland in those days.
After 5 days' work, during which Coulthard demonstrated extraordinary skills when filming a hurling match, for example, a game he'd never seen, an evening-long sequence in a crowded pub without having to move a single customer out of the way, we went back to France, Coulthard to work on The Bride Wore Black with François Truffaut. Coulthard tells me that he made the mistake of giving up smoking at that point.
La mariée était un autre problème parce que j'avais décidé d'arrêter de fumer, parce que je fumais beaucoup. Et naturellement, j'étais d'une humeur épouvantable. Et je m'engueulais avec tout le monde, et je me suis engueulé même avec François Truffaut, ce qui fait que La mariée était en noir était le dernier film que j'ai fait avec François Truffaut. Et j'ai recommencé à fumer après. Hein.
By this time, fortunately for us, Coulthard was back on the fags and relaxed. I'd got this far partly because the French New Wave directors had not only dismantled many of the obstacles to production, professional snobbery was no longer in fashion. Coulthard did not think it absurd to be asked to work with an inexperienced director.
Le fait qu'il n'y avait pas fait de film, c'était plutôt, disons, presque intéressant parce que ça permet de faire quelque chose qui est un peu plus spontané que les gens qui sont des vieux routiers du système et qui connaissent toutes les combines. Première partie, j'ai été très étonné de voir l'emprise des curés sur le pays. Je veux dire, c'était extraordinaire. Ça correspondait d'ailleurs à ces 50 ans de retard. Je veux dire, on avait l'impression d'avoir un pays où il y avait un gouvernement, mais qu'en fait, c'était les curés qui commandaient. Parce qu'on avait une équipe irlandaise. C'est d'abord, je veux dire, déjà une assez grande fraternité, je veux dire, entre nous. Je veux dire, c'est bien qu'on avait, comme je parle très mal anglais, j'en avais du mal à se comprendre, mais enfin. Et puis en même temps, une qualité qui existait et qui malheureusement a tendance à se perdre maintenant, une grande conscience professionnelle. Les gens essayaient de faire toujours le mieux possible.
We worked day and night rounding up as many aspects of this Irish life as we could cram in. From students to priests, patriotic sportsmen to disheartened married women. We even netted a world star, John Huston, shooting a Hollywood turkey, Sinful Davy, in the Wicklow Mountains.
A film made by Ireland and Irishmen would be of infinitely greater importance to the country than this foreign film that we were making and still are making here now. It's true, it's plowing some $1 million into the economy of the country, but in the long run, that wouldn't mean half as much as a native film made by Irishmen.
Bon, la première fois que j'ai vu le film, je veux dire, c'était après que tu aies terminé le montage. Quand tu m'as montré le film pour la première fois, je ne m'attendais pas du tout à ça. En plus, ça m'a beaucoup surpris d'ailleurs, parce que je me suis dit, il va y avoir sûrement des problèmes avec les Irlandais, parce que c'était pas tendre du tout. C'était quand même, comment je peux dire ça, très irlandais, je veux dire, comme fabrication. C'était, enfin, pas comme fabrication, comme conception du système. Mais enfin, moi, j'ai trouvé ça très, très intéressant, je veux dire. Enfin, comme ça reflétait tout ce que j'avais vu, j'ai trouvé ça assez fantastique quand même.
Back in Paris, I began the editing with Lila Biro, while Coulthard was shooting Weekend for Jean-Luc Godard.
Quand on avait fini de tourner la deuxième partie, là, pendant que j'étais faire le montage, je suis allé tourner Weekend avec Jean-Luc. Alors Weekend, c'était un film très particulier parce que Jean-Luc, alors après il avait décidé, toujours dans le but d'emmerder le producteur, de faire le travelling le plus long du monde, le tracking le plus long du monde. C'était un truc qui faisait 300 mètres. Et quand ça a été terminé, il l'a monté, il a coupé le travelling en deux. Le montage.
We completed the final edit just in time to enter Rocky Road for the Cannes Film Festival of 1968, a momentous year. It was one of 8 films out of 64 entries selected for the Critics' Week, alongside directors such as Jean-Marie Staub and Werner Herzog. Ireland had nothing to do with this success. We had entered the film independently, unknown to the Irish authorities.
There was another festival which was a target, which was our own Cork Film Festival. Now, Ireland hadn't made a feature-length film in 20 years, and maybe for 10 years afterwards. And so they couldn't possibly turn down an Irish film which had been selected for Cannes or was considered good enough for Cannes. So there was a bit of haggling, and then I got finally the director of the Cork Film Festival sent me a letter and said, "We'll take your film, but mind you now, I don't want to have any politics. There's to be no politics." The film had been chosen for a lunchtime screening, and it was a very special lunchtime that day, because the festival had invited the journalists to a free Guinness and oyster party in Kinsale, 20 miles away. So, nobody turned up for the screening. So obviously what we had to do, and what I did, was we hired a hall, show the film, and of course it was packed. And then we got more abuse.
I had suspected that this was a package Ireland would be unwilling to digest. How unwilling became thunderously clear. "A film for the blind," roared one critic. Another wrote in a feature article, "Peter Lennon, who believes in nothing at all, has made a film insulting Ireland." And this reporter hadn't even seen the film. Only at that stage the critic of the Irish Times, Fergus Linehan, supported the film, and he did so over and over again. The interesting thing about scandals is that they can generate a commercial power, temporarily at least, stronger even than obeisance to an establishment. A Dublin independent exhibitor agreed to take the film. But Rocky Road had still to pass the censor. I arrived at the censorship office with the film under my arm and insisted on sitting in with the censor. He turned out to be Gabriel Fallon, a journalist I knew who worked for the Catholic Standard. At the end of the projection, he made this wonderful statement. He informed me that he was obliged to pass the film for public exhibition because of a technicality. "Since," he said, "there is no sex in the film, Peter, there is nothing I can do against you." The film then ran for 7 weeks in a small Dublin cinema opposite University College to packed and mostly gleeful audiences. Then nothing for 25 years. But Rocky Road was beginning to have an adventurous parallel life in France. Mauled and ostracised in Ireland, our great hope was the Cannes Film Festival. It was instead disaster. The festival collapsed, brought down that very afternoon by the students and filmmakers. When the lights went on at the end of our projection, Jean-Luc Godard and Claude Lelouch invaded the auditorium and announced the festival was over. We were the last film projected at that historic festival.
La solidarité du cinéma sur les mouvements étudiants et ouvriers qui se passent en France. La seule manière pratique de le faire est d'arrêter immédiatement toute projection. Non.
Comme étranger, est-ce que je veux dire quelque chose, moi? Oui. Alors moi, je suis irlandais et j'ai passé mon premier film. Et votre révolution a commencé 5 minutes après que vous avez passé mon film. Et moi, je ne peux pas voter.
Votre film, monsieur, peut passer dans le cinéma aujourd'hui à la télé.
Laissez-moi parler. Je ne peux pas voter maintenant que les autres films ne soient pas projetés parce que moi, j'ai vu mon chance. Et aussi, ça fait un temps.
Je souhaite que le festival s'arrête.
Oui, mais...
On parle solidarité avec...
Destiny now laid a huge benevolent paw on us. In normal circumstances, Rocky Road would probably have survived as no more than a novelty from a small country. But totally by chance, I'd focused on the very issue that now feverishly preoccupied French youth. What do you do with your revolution once you've got it? The answer is, of course, you give it back to the bourgeoisie and the clergy. The students adopted Rocky Road and brought it up to Paris and put it out on their own distribution system in the amphitheatres of the Sorbonne under siege. The first public showing of Rocky Road was actually down in the basement amphitheatre of the Sorbonne Faculté des Lettres. It played in what was for me the sweetest fragrance of the time, the eye-stinging perfume of CS gas lingering from a night of battle in the cobbled streets above. Rocky Road, crippled in Ireland, began to bounce about happily in the May turmoil. The French critics came to the Sorbonne screenings, and now we began to get a different kind of coverage. The contrast between what people in Ireland saw and what they saw in France demonstrates the huge rift between a country with a film culture and one with none. Ireland was a country where documentary filmmaking was enthralled to the cosmetic preoccupations of the tourist board. Getting a dose of the camera stilo, as distinct from the more passive pen, was quite a shock. The French saw it as a film, the Irish as an insult.
The French could see, because they were used to films that criticised communities or societies with the best motives, you know, and a perfectly valid exercise, and even that if one is a true patriot, as it were, you criticise your own country, you don't let it slide into the kind of gloomy, wretched state that Ireland had been going deeply into, especially in the 50s, and hadn't come out of it at all in the 60s by the time we got there. The Irish were continually telling themselves that it didn't exist, you know. They thought that nobody took any notice of censorship, and you have this list of the censorship board. In fact, the censorship board for a long time wouldn't publish the list of books they banned, you know. You couldn't get access to it. It's extraordinary. But people were continually fooling themselves into things had changed and things had improved with no evidence of any such thing. And that's why it made it so difficult for them to confront or want to confront problems. And they also had this extraordinary thing. When I wrote the first articles criticising the social situation in the clergy, they said, "Oh, he's ruined the cause." What bloody cause? I mean, there were people like wonderful Sean O'Whalon writing in intellectual magazines. There were people talking a lot in pubs, you know. But there was no real serious attempt to clean people's minds out, and so to bring a real change in the country. And it was this terrible and fatal connection between the church and the state. The negative of the film went missing, and about 14 or 15 years ago the Irish Film Archive took care of the film, but all they had was 16mm and a blow-up of 35, and it was getting more and more worn away. So we applied to the Irish Film Board for money to restore the film and then to make this documentary telling the story of Rocky Road, its reception in Ireland and its adventure at the Cannes Film Festival. So Niamh O'Flynn started to take a great interest in Rocky Road to Dublin, and for the past 14 years she's been taking care of it. That has kept the thing alive.
What guerrilla fighters had built up was to be a traitor. We were to keep quiet, and they, like jolly but tough old uncles, would take care of us. What they expected from us now was a new kind of heroism, heroic obedience.
It was never shown outside Dublin. It was only shown in one Dublin cinema, never shown in any provincial cinema either because the cinema managers didn't want to offend the clergy or the government, or didn't want to offend themselves, you know, because they wouldn't have approved of the content of the film. And this has never been shown on Irish television.
The 50s brought a deepening depression, unemployment.
We've got rid of that tedious business of people judging it because it was insulting, and are now looking at it of what it was, a genuine record of how people lived and thought and felt in the 60s in Ireland. And I must say, in fact, they might now begin to realise that it was a very affectionate film about Ireland. Because it attacked all the institutions so fiercely, they missed the point that it was on the side of the people, and they're very affectionately presented. And the curious thing is that one of the people in the end most affectionately presented is a censor.
We're at the beginning of a new age, really a new wonderful age of the world, but at the beginning of it, and therefore it hasn't any, so to speak, traditional character about it yet, but it's acquiring it every moment, every day. And I wish it well. I wish it well. I won't see it. That's about all I can say about it.
From the very beginning, I said, this is a personal account. I was very clear to say, this is me looking at my country, and this is what I see. And this is the best possible moment to reintroduce this film into Irish life, because you get your bearings for the present from what went on in the past. And Rocky Road is the only record, the only significant or lengthy record of the 60s, you know. And that's a very important part of where we all came from.
hopes to see the holy ground once more. Fine girl you are! See the sun of my rising, I see it coming soon. And the sky it is so cloudy, you can scarcely see the moon. And the moon, your ship, she was tossing about, the ring it was all torn. And still I live in hope to see the holy ground once more. Fine girl you are, and a girl I do adore. And still I live in hopes to see the holy ground once more. Fine girl you are, and now the storm is over, and we are safe on shore. We will drink and toast to the holy ground and the girls that we are.